I tracked it for miles, but the trail led back to me. The truck's headlights carved a narrow path through darkness as James Harlow navigated the rutted Forest Service road. Beside him, Nathan stared out the passenger window, the reflection of his face fragmenting with each jolt of the suspension. "Storm's coming," James said, eyeing the sky where heavy clouds mothered the stars, barometers dropping fast. Nathan offered no response. At 19, he'd grown into a stranger, tall and lean like his father, but with an impenetrable silence that had settled over him since the divorce 3 years ago. The thermometer on the dashboard read 28 degrees when they finally reached the cabin, a sturdy structure of weathered logs that had belonged to James's grandfather. The wind had picked up, driving the first needles of sleet against their faces as they unloaded supplies. "Get the generator going," James instructed, hefting a cooler of provisions. "I'll check the pipes aren't frozen." Inside, the cabin was a tomb of cold. James's breath clouded as he inspected the plumbing with a flashlight. A mouse scurried across the floor, disappearing into a crack in the baseboard. Outside, the generator sputtered twice before roaring to life. By the time Nathan came in, James had a fire blazing in the wood stove. The cabin's single room gradually warmed as they unpacked in silence. James hung his Remington 700 on the wall pegs, running a finger along the polished walnut stock. "Carl at the general store says there's a buck out here like nothing he's ever seen," James said, arranging boxes of ammunition on the shelf. 12 points at least. Locals call it the ghost. "Right," Nathan said, the first word he'd uttered in hours. "Got some trail cam photos." James pulled out his phone, swiping to grainy nighttime images. "Look at the size of that rack." Nathan glanced at the blurry white shape among trees. "Could be anything." James tucked the phone away, disappointment tight in his chest. There had been a time when Nathan would have been electrified by such a prospect, when tracking a legendary buck would have been their shared adventure, not just another of his father's obsessions. The sleet turned to snow around midnight, accumulating with alarming speed. James woke at 3 a.m. to check the roof, concerned about the weight. Outside, the temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees. The wind sliced through his jacket as he climbed the ladder, clearing snow with a broom in the beam of his headlamp. From the roof, he spotted movement at the forest's edge. A large shape, pale and ghostly in the darkness. His heart quickened. Without a rifle, without proper gear, he watched as the massive buck stepped from the tree line, its breath fogging in great plumes. Their eyes locked across the distance. The buck's head raised, antlers like a crown of bone against the night sky. "Nathan," James whispered, but he knew his son couldn't hear. The buck vanished into the trees as quickly as it had appeared. James stood motionless, snow gathering on his shoulders, his fingers numb inside his gloves. He'd come here to hunt, but now understood he was being hunted as well, by time, by regret, by the growing knowledge that he was losing something more precious than any trophy. When he descended the ladder, he found Nathan standing in the doorway, watching him with a mixture of concern and resentment. "You could have fallen," Nathan said. "I saw it," James replied. The ghost. Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, a flash of the boy who had once worshipped his father's tracking skills. Then it was gone, replaced by the practiced indifference of a son who'd learned to expect disappointment. "Get some sleep," Nathan said, turning back into the cabin. "Big day tomorrow." Dawn broke through ice-laden branches, casting fractured light across 4 inches of fresh snow. James emerged from the cabin to find Nathan already outside, studying a topographical map spread across the hood of the truck. "You're up early," James said, his breath crystallizing. Nathan folded the map. "Figured we should head northeast, higher ground." James nodded, surprised by his son's initiative. They gathered their gear in silence. Rifles, rangefinders, binoculars, emergency kits. James checked the weather radio. Another storm front expected by afternoon, temperatures dropping to single digits. "We'll need to be back before dark," he warned. "Weather turns fast up here." They moved into the forest like shadows, their footfalls muffled by snow. James watched his son navigate the terrain with unexpected confidence, noticing how the boy had grown into a man during their years of drifting apart. Nathan stopped occasionally, examining ground sign with practiced precision. 3 miles in, they crossed a frozen creek. The ice groaned beneath their weight, hairline cracks spreading outward. James felt his heart jump as Nathan's boot broke through, plunging into frigid water. "Don't move," James ordered, dropping to his knees to distribute weight. He inched forward, extending his rifle butt for Nathan to grab. With a swift pull, he extracted his son from the hazard, but not before water had filled Nathan's boot to the ankle. "Frostbite risk," James said, already digging in his pack for a spare sock. "Change it now." As Nathan removed his boot, James surveyed their position. They were deep in the forest, far from the cabin, with a storm approaching. Poor planning, poor judgment, the kind that got hunters killed. "We should head back," Nathan said through clenched teeth. James was about to agree when he spotted them. Tracks unlike any he'd seen before. Enormous prints with a distinctive, uneven gait, as if the animal dragged one hoof slightly. "Look," he whispered, pointing. The tracks were fresh, cutting through virgin snow toward a dense stand of white pines. Without thinking, James began to follow, his pulse quickening. "Dad," Nathan called, but James was already moving, compelled by instinct older than reason. The tracks led them through a punishing landscape, up steep ravines where one misstep meant a broken leg, through thickets where thorns tore at their clothing. Nathan's face was pale, his wet foot clearly troubling him, but he pressed on without complaint. By mid-morning, they'd covered another 2 miles, climbing steadily. The temperature continued to drop. Wind gusted through the trees, driving snow into their faces. James knew they should turn back, but the tracks were so clear, so tantalizingly fresh. "There," he hissed suddenly, dropping to a crouch. Through a gap in the trees, they glimpsed movement, a flash of tawny hide, the curve of an antler. James raised his rifle, sighting down the scope. The ghost materialized at the edge of a clearing, massive and regal, its coat almost white in the winter light. James's finger tensed on the trigger. The buck was at extreme range, over 400 yards, but he'd made shots like this before. One clean shot through the heart, and the legend would be theirs. As he prepared to fire, a blast of wind rocked him sideways. His shot went wild, echoing through the forest. The buck vanished instantly. "Damn it," James growled, already on his feet. "Dad, stop," Nathan called, but James was charging forward, consumed by the hunt. When he reached the clearing, the buck was gone. Only tracks remained, leading deeper into the wilderness. Behind him, Nathan limped into view, his face tight with pain. "We need to go back," Nathan said. "The storm." But James was staring at the tracks, mesmerized. "We're close, so close." Above them, the sky darkened ominously. Snow began to fall in earnest, thick flakes that would soon obscure any sign. James stood at the crossroads of obsession and reason, while his son waited, shivering for his decision. For 3 days, the blizzard imprisoned them in the cabin. James paced like a caged animal, checking his rifle, reorganizing gear, studying maps, until Nathan wondered if his father might wear through the paper with his gaze. Outside, snow piled against the windows, dimming the interior to perpetual twilight. On the 4th morning, they woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Drifts tall as a man, trees bowed under white weight, a world both beautiful and deadly. 20 below, James announced, checking the thermometer. "We'll need the snowshoes." Nathan's foot had swollen from their previous excursion, his sock coming away bloody when he changed it. James cleaned the blisters with antiseptic, his hands surprisingly gentle. "You should stay here," he told his son. "Rest that foot." Nathan shook his head. "And let you freeze to death out there? No way." They set out at first light, their snowshoes creaking across the crystalline surface. The cold was absolute, burning their lungs with each breath. Within minutes, ice formed on James's beard, on Nathan's eyelashes. By noon, they'd found nothing. No tracks, no sign, as if the ghost had been swept away with the storm. James's frustration manifested in reckless speed, pulling ahead until Nathan struggled to keep pace. "We should have gone fishing instead," Nathan muttered as they stopped to drink from thermoses of hot coffee. "Like we planned." James didn't respond, his eyes scanning the horizon. The fishing trip, a promise made and forgotten, like so many others. They separated briefly to check different areas, agreeing to meet at a distinctive lightning-struck pine. When Nathan arrived, his father wasn't there. He waited 30 minutes, growing increasingly concerned as the short winter day began to wane. He found James 2 miles further, kneeling beside a small depression in the snow, a deer bed recently used. "Look," James whispered, pointing to a tuft of hair caught on a branch. "It's white." That night, James didn't sleep. Nathan woke at 3 a.m. to find his father's bunk empty, the cabin door ajar. Through the window, he could see his father's headlamp bobbing among distant trees, a solitary firefly in the frozen dark. By the 5th day, James's obsession had consumed him. He set out before dawn and returned after dusk, his movements increasingly desperate. Twice he'd spotted the ghost at extreme distance, but never close enough for a shot. Each sighting fueled his mania. "I've hunted on 3 continents," he told Nathan, over a dinner he barely touched. "Never seen anything like it. The way it moves, like it knows exactly where I'm going to be." "Maybe it does," Nathan replied. "Maybe it's hunting you back." James's laugh was hollow. "I found something today." He pulled out his phone, showing Nathan a photo of a rusted trap half buried in snow. "Old poacher's trap. Looks like something got caught in it years ago. Tore free. The ghost would explain the limp." That night, a wolf pack howled in the distance, their voices echoing across the frozen landscape. Nathan lay awake, listening to his father's restless movements in the adjacent bunk. Outside, the temperature plummeted to 30 below. Near midnight, a branch shattered beneath the weight of ice. The crack, like a gunshot. Both men started upright, reaching instinctively for weapons. "Just a branch," Nathan said. But James was already pulling on his boots, his eyes feverish. "I'm going to check the cameras." "Dad, it's the middle of the night." "Perfect time. The ghost moves at night." Nathan watched his father disappear into darkness, wondering if the cold had affected his mind, or if this obsession had been building for years, waiting for the right moment to consume him. An hour passed, then 2. Concern gnawed at Nathan's gut. When he finally couldn't stand it anymore, he dressed and stepped outside, the cold hitting him like a physical blow. His headlamp revealed his father's tracks, leading into the forest. He followed them, calling out occasionally, his voice swallowed by the vast silence. The wilderness around him was indifferent to human presence, to human survival. He found his father's headlamp first abandoned in snow, its beam still burning, then a glove, then a trail of blood, bright crimson against white, leading toward a ravine where shadows gathered like predators waiting to feed. Nathan's heart hammered against his ribs as he followed the blood trail to the ravine's edge. Below, in the beam of his headlamp, he saw his father sprawled on a shelf of ice, 10 feet down, motionless. "Dad," he shouted, already searching for a way down. James stirred, raising a hand to shield his eyes from the light. "Nathan?" The relief was momentary. Getting his father out of the ravine in the darkness, in this cold, would be nearly impossible. Nathan found a route, a treacherous scramble down loose rock and ice, and reached his father's side, assessing the damage. James's forehead was split open, blood freezing on his face. His left ankle lay at an unnatural angle. "Slipped," James explained through chattering teeth. "Tracking something." Nathan cut strips from his thermal undershirt, binding the wound. "Can you move your toes?" James grimaced, nodding. "Not broken, just twisted." Together, they managed the ascent, James leaning heavily on his son, stopping every few feet as pain racked his body. The temperature continued to drop, their breath freezing in their lungs. By the time they reached level ground, Nathan was supporting nearly all his father's weight. The trek back to the cabin was a nightmare of endurance. Each step a battle against cold, against fatigue, against the wilderness that seemed determined to claim them. James drifted in and out of lucidity, sometimes mumbling about the ghost, sometimes silent and heavy in Nathan's arms. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the cabin. Nathan dragged his father inside, stoked the fire to blazing, and treated the wounds as best he could with their first aid kit. James's ankle had swollen to twice its normal size. The gash on his forehead needed stitches they couldn't provide. "We need to get you to a hospital," Nathan said. But the satellite phone revealed the bitter truth. The storm had knocked out service, and the forest roads were impassable. For 3 days, James burned with fever, the wound on his head showing angry red lines, infection setting in. Nathan melted snow for water, kept the fire roaring, and hunted desperately for food, bringing down a snowshoe hare that he made into thin broth. On the 4th day, James's fever broke. He woke clear-eyed but weak, accepting the broth Nathan offered. "I found something strange out there," James said, his voice raspy. "The night I fell." Nathan tensed, anticipating more delusions about the ghost. "Tracks," James continued, "perfect circle, starting and ending in the same place." "You were disoriented." "No, someone's been tracking the same buck, and tracking me." Nathan's expression hardened. "That's crazy." "Is it?" James pointed to his journal on the table. "Check the map." I marked where I found the circular tracks. Nathan flipped through the journal, finding page after page of obsessive notes about the ghost feeding patterns, bedding areas, possible routes. Nothing about their planned fishing trip. Nothing about Nathan at all. The realization stung like a physical wound. "You think someone else wants your precious trophy that badly?" Nathan's voice cracked with sudden anger. "That's all you care about, isn't it? The mighty hunter and his legendary buck." "Nathan." 3 years, Nathan continued, unable to stop now that the dam had broken. 3 years since you and Mom split, and all you ever talk about is hunting. Did you ever wonder why I stopped wanting to come up here? Did you even notice?" James struggled to sit up straighter. "Of course I noticed. Then why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you try to fix it?" "I am trying," James said quietly. "Why do you think I wanted you here so badly?" "To help me track some deer." The silence between them was charged with years of unspoken words. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. "The tracks," James said finally. "Whoever left them knows these woods almost as well as I do. They've been shadowing us since we arrived." Nathan looked away, the truth burning in his chest like coals. He'd spent weeks studying his father's hunting journals, learning his patterns, his preferred routes. He'd been the shadow, sabotaging trail cameras, leaving false tracks, doing anything to divert his father's attention from the hunt. Now, with James injured and trapped by winter's fury, Nathan realized how dangerous his game had become. The wilderness didn't forgive such deceptions. It exacted its price in blood and pain. The satellite phone crackled to life at midnight, startling both men from uneasy sleep. Nathan grabbed it, relief flooding through him as he connected with emergency services. A rescue team could reach them by helicopter if the weather cleared. A big if, with another storm front approaching. James sat by the wood stove, his injured leg propped on a chair, watching his son relay their coordinates and situation with unexpected competence. When had Nathan learned to handle emergencies with such calm? There were gaps in his knowledge of his son that ached like physical wounds. "They'll try tomorrow morning," Nathan said, setting down the phone. "If the wind dies down." James nodded, then gestured to the chair opposite him. "We need to talk about those tracks." Nathan's face closed like a fist. He remained standing, arms crossed against his chest. "Someone's been following us," James continued, "moving my trail cameras, leaving false sign. Maybe the ghost is smarter than you think. This isn't about the deer, Nathan. Someone's deliberately sabotaging our hunt. I want to know why." The fire popped and hissed in the silence that followed. Outside, wind howled around the cabin's corners, rattling the windows like a predator testing for weakness. "It was me," Nathan said finally. the words hanging in the air between them. James stared at his son, confusion giving way to disbelief. "You? I've been studying your journals for months," Nathan continued, the confession rushing out now. "Learning your patterns, how you track, where you place cameras. Why?" "Because this." Nathan gestured wildly at the cabin. "The rifles on the wall, the forest beyond the windows. This is all you care about. The hunt, the kill, the next trophy." James shook his head, but Nathan wasn't finished. "When's my birthday, Dad? What's my major in college? Who was my first girlfriend? You don't know because you never asked. You were too busy chasing things with antlers across 3 continents." "That's not fair," James protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "You want to know why I sabotaged your precious hunt? Because I wanted you to see me, to remember I exist." The accusation landed like a physical blow. James closed his eyes, memories cascading through his mind. Nathan at 12, proudly showing him a perfect track cast. Nathan at 15, eyes shining as they field-dressed his first deer. Nathan at 17, silent and distant as James packed for a safari, missing his son's orchestra concert. When James opened his eyes, they were wet. "I see you, Nathan. I've always seen you." "No. You see the version of me that fits into your world. The hunting partner, the apprentice." James reached for his journal, flipping to a page near the back that Nathan hadn't seen. There, in his father's precise handwriting, was a different kind of entry. Nathan, 19, biology major, plays cello in university orchestra, dated Sophia junior year of high school, birthday, April 17. "I know I've been a poor father," James said quietly, "but don't think for a second that I don't know who you are." The revelation hung between them like smoke, neither man certain how to proceed. Nathan sank into the chair opposite his father, suddenly exhausted. "Your stunt could have gotten us both killed," James said. No anger in his voice, only recognition of wilderness truth. "I know that now." Nathan stared at his hands. "When I found you in that ravine," he couldn't finish the sentence. The image of his father's broken body on the ice shelf would haunt him for years to come. The wind increased, driving snow against the cabin with renewed fury. The rescue would almost certainly be delayed. They were still trapped together, still forced to confront the wilderness outside and the wilderness between them. "What now?" Nathan asked. James looked at his injured leg, at the rifles on the wall, at his son's face, familiar and foreign simultaneously. "Now we survive together." But both men knew survival meant more than enduring cold and hunger. It meant finding a path through the emotional wasteland they'd created, a journey possibly more dangerous than any physical ordeal the forest could devise. Outside, something large moved past the cabin window, a pale shape in the blizzard darkness. Neither man saw it, too focused on the precipice they stood upon, uncertain whether they would fall or fly. Morning brought clear skies, but temperatures so low the trees cracked like gunshots. The satellite phone remained silent, no word from rescue services. James's fever had returned during the night, his face flushed and damp despite the cold. "We can't wait," Nathan decided, checking their dwindling supplies. "I need to get you antibiotics." James gripped his son's wrist with surprising strength. Forest Service cabin, ridge trail, 5 miles northeast, emergency supplies there. Nathan knew the cabin from childhood excursions, a primitive shelter stocked with medical kits, emergency rations, and a radio more powerful than their satellite phone. Reaching it meant traversing some of the most challenging terrain in the forest, alone and deadly cold. "I'll be back before dark," Nathan promised, loading his pack with essentials: compass, fire starter, emergency blanket, water, knife, handgun. "Take the Remington," James insisted. "More stopping power than your .30-30. Nathan hesitated, then lifted his father's prized rifle from the wall pegs. The weapon was an extension of James, carried on hunts across 3 continents. That he would entrust it to Nathan now spoke volumes. The cold hit like a sledgehammer when Nathan stepped outside, instantly freezing the moisture in his nostrils. He pulled his balaclava higher, checked his compass, and began the grueling trek. The snow was chest-deep in places, forcing Nathan to break trail with exhausting effort. Each step drained precious energy he couldn't afford to lose. Halfway to his destination, he stopped to catch his breath, sweat freezing beneath his layers despite the exertion. Movement caught his eye, a flash of white against white. The ghost materialized 50 yards away, watching him with ancient eyes. Nathan raised the Remington instinctively, muscle memory taking over. Through the scope, he saw the buck clearly for the first time. 12 magnificent points crowning its head, a distinctive white patch on its chest, and most tellingly, the scarred left foreleg that caused its uneven gait. The animal had indeed survived a poacher's trap, bearing its wounds like battle honors. Nathan's finger tensed on the trigger. One clean shot would end the hunt, would give his father the trophy he'd obsessed over. Perhaps it would even bridge the chasm between them. The buck didn't run. It stood motionless, breath clouding around its muzzle, accepting whatever fate Nathan chose. In that moment, Nathan understood why his father called it the ghost. The animal possessed an otherworldly dignity, a presence that transcended mere flesh and bone. Nathan lowered the rifle. "Not today," he whispered. The buck held his gaze for a moment longer, then bounded away, vanishing into the forest as if it had never existed. Nathan reached the Forest Service cabin an hour later, his extremities numb despite his precautions. Inside, he found the medical kit, the radio, and unexpectedly, a photograph pinned to the wall. James and Nathan from a hunting trip 7 years earlier, both smiling, a shared triumph evident in their posture. He hadn't known his father kept such mementos. The radio crackled to life when he powered it. Connection established with a ranger station 30 miles south. Rescue was possible, but not immediate. The helicopter grounded by mechanical issues, snowmobiles dispatched instead, arrival expected by nightfall. Nathan gathered what he needed and began the return journey, following his own tracks through deepening afternoon shadows. The temperature continued to drop. Twice he had to stop, stamping feeling back into his feet, fear gnawing at his edges. Cold this severe didn't forgive mistakes. A mile from their cabin, he heard wolves, not the distant howling of previous nights, but the closer, hunting cries of a pack on the move. Nathan quickened his pace, the hairs on his neck rising. They emerged from the trees ahead, 5 gray shadows flowing across snow, hunger driving them to boldness they'd normally avoid. Nathan raised the Remington, firing a warning shot over their heads. The wolves hesitated, but didn't retreat. The lead wolf advanced, its yellow eyes fixed on Nathan with terrible intelligence. He aimed carefully, knowing his life depended on precision. The shot echoed across the frozen landscape. The wolf dropped, and its companions scattered instantly. Nathan reached the cabin as last light faded from the sky, his body pushed beyond exhaustion. Inside, he found James awake and lucid, relief washing over his face at his son's return. "Did you see it?" James asked as Nathan administered antibiotics from the emergency kit. "The ghost?" Nathan nodded, preparing for disappointment when he admitted he hadn't taken the shot. "I had a clean shot," he said. "Perfect broadside at 50 yards. And I let it go." James was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Good." The snowmobiles arrived after midnight, their headlights cutting through darkness like search beams. 2 forest rangers loaded James onto a rescue sled, while a third helped Nathan secure the cabin. "You're lucky," the lead ranger told them as they prepared to depart. "Storms coming in that would have trapped you another week, temperature dropping to 40 below. At the regional hospital, doctors cleaned and stitched James's head wound, administered IV antibiotics for the infection, and immobilized his ankle in a walking boot. Nathan remained at his father's bedside through it all, a silent guardian. "You saved my life," James said when they were finally alone. Nathan shrugged. "You would have done the same, but I wouldn't have been as competent." Pride colored James's voice. "When did you learn to handle yourself like that in the wilderness?" "I had a good teacher." The admission cost Nathan something, but felt right nonetheless. 3 days later, they returned to the cabin to collect their gear before heading home. The forest had transformed again. A fresh foot of snow covered their tracks, erasing all evidence of their ordeal. The temperature hovered at 30 below, the air so cold it crystallized in their lungs. Inside, the cabin felt different, no longer a battleground of unspoken resentments, but not quite a place of peace either. Something unfinished lingered in the air between them. James hobbled to the wood stove on crutches, setting a fire with practiced hands. "I need to show you something before we leave." From his pack, he withdrew a weathered leather case. Inside lay an ancient hunting knife, its blade worn thin from decades of use, its handle polished by generations of hands. "My grandfather gave this to my father, who gave it to me when I killed my first deer." James held it out to Nathan. "It should have been yours years ago." Nathan accepted the knife, its weight substantial in his palm. "Why now?" "Because you've earned it. Not by killing, but by saving. By showing more wisdom in the wilderness than I ever did." Outside, the wind shifted, bringing with it the promise of snow. Time was short if they wanted to leave before the roads became impassable again. "One last thing," James said, pulling on his parka. "I want to set a trail camera before we go." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "For the ghost?" "To study, not hunt," James clarified. "If you're willing, I thought we might come back in spring. Watch how it moves through the seasons." Together, they trudged through snow to the clearing, where Nathan had encountered the buck. James set the camera with careful precision, angling it toward a game trail. "Biology, right?" James said as they worked. "Your major?" Nathan nodded. Surprised his father remembered. "Conservation biology. Specifically," James continued. "You mentioned it once, on the phone last year. Said you were interested in wildlife management. I didn't think you were listening." "I listen more than you know." James adjusted the camera's settings. "I'm just not good at showing it." They finished their task in companionable silence, then turned toward the cabin, toward home. As they walked, Nathan found himself scanning the forest's edge, half hoping for one final glimpse of the ghost. "It won't show itself again," James said, reading his thoughts. "Not until we're gone." "How do you know?" "Because that's not how the wilderness works. It doesn't perform on command." Nathan considered this. "Is that why you hunt? To be part of something that can't be controlled?" "I hunt because it connects me to something older than myself," James replied. "Something my father taught me, and his father before him." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I was wrong to think it was the only connection that mattered." As if in answer, a branch cracked in the distance. Deliberate, too heavy for wind. Both men turned, rifles instinctively raising. At the forest's edge stood the ghost, magnificent in the winter light. It watched them with ancient eyes, neither fleeing nor advancing. "My God," James whispered. The buck held their gaze for a heartbeat longer, then turned, showing its distinctive limp as it moved away. Not running, but departing on its own terms, melting into the trees until only silence remained. Neither man raised his rifle, neither felt the need. "Ready?" James asked finally. Nathan nodded, the hunting knife secure at his belt, a weight both unfamiliar and right. They moved toward the truck, toward home, leaving their tracks side by side in virgin snow, a path anyone could follow if they knew how to read the signs. Behind them, unseen, the ghost emerged once more to watch their departure. In spring, when they returned, they would find its tracks circling their trail camera, curious about these humans who had chosen not to kill when killing was easy. But that was a story for another season.